Good afternoon and welcome to Nursing Pathways. I'm your host, Curry Bordelon. Please join us by typing your questions in the chat box. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible during our time here. Today we're honored to have Dr. Natalie Baker. She's an associate professor here at the School of Nursing and a legal nurse consultant. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So as we get started, tell us how you became a legal nurse consultant. How did you get to be where you are today?
Well, first, I think we need to go back and look at how I even became a nurse, because I never envisioned being a nurse growing up. Growing up, I was in the typical, middle income family. No one in my family had ever had the opportunity to attend college. However, my parents always impressed upon me and my younger siblings the importance of an education. So as I was growing up here in Birmingham, I was involved at school in things such as band. I was very much involved with helping take care of my grandmother. Even though she lived independently, she had some intellectual and mental disabilities. So I would drive her to the doctor's office. I would take her to buy groceries. So I had a love for taking care of older people, but I didn't really equate that to any type of nursing or caregiving task at the time. So when I was in high school, I discovered that I really enjoyed biology, and I even thought that I would like to perhaps be a high school biology teacher. My mother at the time was working in the public school system, and she really wanted more for me, and she said she really steered me to look at other areas other than teaching. And my father, he really wanted me to be a physician. He wanted the first person in our family to go to college and to actually become a physician. So when it was time for me to start seriously looking at colleges, I realized that my parents did not have the financial means to help me go to school. So I felt like I needed to stay within the Birmingham area. So I enrolled at UAB, and I thought, well, what better place to go? It's local, I can still be at home, and they have a medical school, so I guess that's a perfect fit. So I enrolled in pre-med classes. And my very first pre-med chemistry class, my first semester, was an eye-opening experience. After the first 10 minutes, the professor had a break, took a break, and I bolted out of there and went to the registrar's office, and I dropped that class. And I thought, no, I don't think I can do this. So I was taking, just the regular pre-req courses that everybody takes, your general ed type courses. And so, there was a group of us girls that we tended to take all of the same classes every semester, and we formed study groups, and we would get together in the library and study. And they all then started deciding, they're going to do nursing. So I started looking at nursing. But at first I wasn't very keen on being a nurse, because my only interaction with the nurse up until that point was the nurse who at my old pediatrician's office, and I would only see her when she would come in to give me shots. And her name was Nurse Kelly. And I thought, oh, I can't be a Nurse Kelly. All she does is give shots, and that's mean. I don't want to do that. But as I continued to research and think about it, I realized, there's more to nursing than just working in a doctor's office and giving shots. So I thought, well, maybe I could be a nurse. And so then I started taking, the courses to make sure that I would be admitted into the nursing school here. And then when I applied to the nursing school, I realized, well, I had to come in for an interview. And at the time, I was very afraid to speak to other people, and I was certainly very afraid of any type of public speaking. And so I almost backed out even of that because I didn't want to come over here and talk to the admissions person. Obviously, I got over that fear. I did have that interview, and I will say that to this day, sometimes when I walk down that hall, I remember that anxiety that I had way back when I was 20 years old. So I did then go on to nursing school. I thoroughly enjoyed it. By the time I got into nursing school, I had married a boy that I had actually met here on campus, and he was also in healthcare sciences. And so we finished our degrees here and started our young family. And then after a couple of years, there was this yearning to go back to school. And I thought, as much as I've enjoyed my very short career in nursing, I think I will become a high school biology teacher. Because by that time I thought, I'm grown. I know my mother doesn't really think that I should do that I really should stay in nursing, and she was very proud. Both of my parents were very proud that I had obtained that college degree, but I really had a passion to teach, and I thought I wanted to teach biology. So I was actually on campus one day, and I was enrolling in education classes, and I ran into a colleague of mine. We were both working in home health at the time, and she said, "Oh no, don't leave nursing. You're a good nurse." She said, "Come down here with me to the nursing school." She said, "I'm enrolling in the nurse practitioner program," and she said, "and they have funding." She said, "They'll pay for your education." And I remember standing on University Boulevard and looking at her and asking, "Well, what is a nurse practitioner?" And she shared a little bit, and she said, "I'm not real sure what all they do." She said, "But come on down here, let's at least talk to them." So I did, and obviously I decided to stick with nursing, and I was very happy that I did. And so then after I graduated from the nurse practitioner program, 2 or 3 years later, my husband really wanted to go back to school, and by now he had 2 degrees, and incidentally, he had gone back and gotten a master's in education. But he wanted to go back to medical school. So he was admitted to medical school, and I'm working as a nurse practitioner. And his 3rd and 4th year medical school, he had the opportunity for us to move from Birmingham to Huntsville. And I thought, being a nurse at UAB and knowing that we are inundated with fellows, visiting professors, that I thought this would be a good opportunity for him because he'll get more hands-on experience. So we moved to Huntsville. I was able to keep a part-time position as a nurse practitioner here in Birmingham at Kirkland Clinic. So 3 days a week, I would be on the road driving from Huntsville to Birmingham to see patients, and my dear mother would be driving from Birmingham to Huntsville to take care of the children when they got out of school every day. So we would pass each other on the interstate, and that was my life for 2 years. Also during that time, I really needed to be working more than part-time. And while I thought I had secured some employment in Huntsville, things had fallen through. And so one day I remember I was sitting at the kitchen table, and I'm flipping through an old newspaper, which certainly dates me. And I saw an ad, and it was for actually a lawyer who was soliciting for clients in nursing home abuse cases. And I thought, well, I have nursing home experience as a nurse practitioner. I love how law and medicine intersect, and I thought, surely to goodness they need nurses to review their records, so I called. And so a couple of days later, they returned my call, and I spoke to a nurse. And so she sent me some records. She said, "We really don't need you just to read them and tell us what happened. We think we already know, but we need someone who can be willing to testify and talk about the standards of care of nursing." So that's really what opened the door, and that was back in 1997. And I found that I really enjoyed doing that and educating attorneys on issues related to nursing home care. And so I've done that since 1997. I continued to review cases. Later on, I got to the point that I thought, I want to go back to school yet again. And by that time, our youngest was going off to college, and I was looking at obtaining my doctorate degree here at UAB. And I remember one day my husband coming in, and he gave me the LSAT review book, and he said, "I think you need to go to law school." And I thought about it, and I pondered it for a while, for a few days, and then I ultimately said, I love being a nurse. I don't want to leave the nursing profession. And I have found a niche where I can do legal, but still be a nurse practitioner. And so I then decided to go on and obtain my DNP. And so today, here I sit as an associate professor teaching. So I get to do my teaching that I enjoy doing. I continue to do a practice in a long-term care facility as a nurse practitioner, but then on the side, I also do some legal nurse consulting.
Very interesting story. Come full circle with your start to here you are today. So you briefly touched on a legal nurse consultant. Can we talk a little bit more about the role of the legal nurse consultant, what that is?
Certainly. There are two different distinct areas in legal nurse consulting. One is a testifying or expert legal nurse consultant, which is what I do. I review the records and I tell the attorney if I think I can support whatever issue it is they are looking at. You know, am I willing to do a deposition? Am I willing to go into a courtroom and actually educate the jury on possibly what issues where the nurse is deviated from the standard of care, or if I'm doing the defense side, how they upheld the standards of care. And then the other side is consulting legal nurse consultants, where they're more in the background. They review the records, they create reports for attorneys, and they help the attorneys understand what issues, and then help the attorneys find those experts that they need then for their case.
Did you ever have a mentor that helped guided you through the process of becoming a legal nurse consultant, or was it sort of a learn as you go or self-exploration?
It was mostly self-discovery. I did learn very quickly in the process that there was a national association, the American Association of Legal Nurse Consultants. And I did become a member for a few years. I attended their conferences. I actually started a local chapter for them when we were living in Tennessee. So I did find that there were a lot of resources out there. There are even certification programs that you can go through if you want to. I found that very first call that I made when I spoke to that very first in-house legal nurse consultant, she really helped me a lot because I just told her, I said, obviously I don't have a clue what I'm doing. And she also just kind of helped me navigate the waters. And then once I started learning and becoming more involved with that national organization, then I became a mentor to others who were interested in also becoming a legal nurse consultant.
So if you tell us a little bit more about the normal process when someone approaches you, a legal team or so forth, approaches you about a potential case that they would like to have an expert witness on or a consulting function with. Tell us about that normal process.
Sure. So typically someone from the office will call. It may or may not be the attorney, or they may actually email me. And I will speak with someone related, in the office, and I will ask them what are the issues. And because the first thing I want to know, what is it, just broad category. Are we talking about a fall, a pressure injury, strangulation, choking? What is it that we're talking about? And then if it's something I think that I might want to review, then I'll tell them, okay, you can send me the chart. And you also have to be an entrepreneurial, you have to have a small business license, you have to have separate checking accounts, and so, it's always, you need to send me a retainer for, X amount of hours that I think I'll need to review the case. And then once I review the case, I like to review the case from the perspective of the nurse. What did the nurse know at the time the nurse rendered the care? So I may have 10 years of old medical history on this patient by now, or they may have all of the records from the hospital after the event occurred. I don't like to look at all of that extra stuff until I review the records right there and know what did that nurse know at that given time, so that I can't say, oh, well, in hindsight, she should have known, because that's not the standard of care. And I'll make some notes, and then I will call and set up an appointment, and then I'll talk to the attorney, and I'll say, okay, this is what I found, this is what I anticipate I can say, and then we go forward as to whether or not they want to continue me as an expert. Then as the case evolves, assuming that I do accept the case, then as they get medical records, additional medical records, or deposition testimony, then I'll start reading all of that information, and sometimes it may change some of my opinions. But that's what I do initially, is look at just the medical records that I know that the nurse would have known at that given time.
So I'm sure with your experience for the years, you've had multiple cases from different angles and so forth, but do you have one that really stands out as one that was very challenging to you?
Well, there have obviously been several, but I think one that really stands out, and it happened early in my legal nurse consulting career. There was a case in another state where it actually went all the way to trial, and seldom do they go all the way to trial. Typically, at some point, they're either dismissed because the judge deemed there was not enough merit to go forward, or they settle out of court. But this one actually went to trial, and it was an issue where the patient survived, lived, but had some ongoing disabilities related to the particular incident that had occurred. And so the family, because of what had happened at that nursing home, they felt strongly against ever putting him in another nursing home. So they had decided to file suit so that hopefully they could recover some money to help care for him at home. And so after the trial, the lawyer, I remember her coming up to me and she said, I realized that you never knew that the hospital was directly across the street. And that was the big issue with this case, was there was some prolonged suffering, and he did not get the prompt medical care that he needed, and it took them about 3 days to send him across the street to the emergency room.
That had to be difficult for you to hear.
It was devastating to me to hear that help was literally just feet away, and he had not received that help in a timely manner.
So how did you push forward after that? Because that's one of those type of stories that make you question the choices as far as this role, this function. How do you stay motivated? How do you continue on?
Well, I think that in this particular case, it really made me more determined to continue, because I felt like that it was making a difference. Because oftentimes when a facility, let's say if I'm on the plaintiff's side and a facility has to pay out a large sum of money, then hopefully they will then do an internal investigation and try to create new processes so something like that will not happen again. I have a case currently right now where I'm defending a nurse practitioner, and unfortunately the entire process of the lawsuit has caused her to no longer go into nursing homes to provide care. And I think that's sad that you can get so beat down within the legal system that sometimes you do lose your passion.
You mentioned earlier that you do trial work as well, like actually in-court trial work. Do you have stories where you had a difficult interaction with a judge or attorney or anything like that?
Well, cross-examination whenever you're in trial can be difficult, because obviously the other side is there to refute your testimony, and they're trying to get you to argue with them or to change your story. If you have one small misstep, they view that as, well, you're lying, and they try to, distort whatever it is that you are saying. But I did have one encounter one time when I was on the stand, and the opposing attorney came up and he brought a sheet of paper. It was, one piece from the medical record, and he wanted me to read it out loud to the jury. And one thing, as being a legal nurse consultant, you have to realize you're the expert there of all of those medical records. And so it's your responsibility to know those records inside and out. And so he brought it to me, and the passage was on the bottom of the page. And he asked me to read it out loud to the jury. And so I did. And I certainly also knew where he was going with his line of questioning. And so the remaining part of that passage was actually on the other sheet, on the other side of the paper. So I went to flip it over, and he stopped me, and he says, "No, I ask you to only read what's at the bottom." And I looked at the judge and I said, "Sir, if I only read what's on the bottom, it's going to take this passage out of context. And the only way the jury can get all of the information is if I'm allowed to turn it over and read the rest of her note." And he allowed me to do so.
How did that attorney respond?
He seemed to be very nice. I mean, he was very professional. And, he just, when I explained my request, it seemed to be a simple request, and he agreed if we're going to educate the jury and try to tell the story, this attorney brought that piece of paper up as an exhibit, so we need to make sure we read all of it into the record.
Yeah. So we've talked a great deal about the difficulties and some challenges that you've encountered and so forth. Do you have an example of a story where you had a heartwarming experience, or one that's very positive that it resonates with you?
I actually recently went to arbitration on a case, and typically I have no contact with the family at all, none. Even during the trial, I'm not allowed to speak with the family, which can be awkward sometimes when they take a break if we're in the bathroom at the same time. And I only know that they're the family because they're sitting there at the table with the attorney. That's the only way I even know who they are. But I went to an arbitration recently, and arbitrations are very relaxed. And an arbitration is when 1 to 3 attorneys hear a case, there's no jury, and it's just much more relaxed atmosphere. And so the night before the arbitration, the attorney that I was working with asked me, he said, I would like for you, when I was out of state, and he said, I would like for you to come down to the lobby and meet the client, meet the family member. And so I did, and she had just a lot of questions about the medical records. And it was my opportunity to really explain things to her and to tell her, now you're going to hear me talk about some of this tomorrow. Let me explain it a little bit more in a more elementary level so you'll understand. And I remember her sitting there crying and saying, I thought that was what was occurring, but now you've confirmed that I was right. And so that was heartwarming for me to be able to give her some peace about the situation.
So let's talk about a little bit more. We briefly touched on how you became a legal nurse consultant, some national organizations that are involved, and I think you touched on certification a little bit.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Certainly. Those who are doing consulting work, they may be interested in getting an actual certificate so that they can say that they are a certified legal nurse consultant. Especially when they're first starting out, when they're trying to open those first doors to try to get some business. And there are some very good programs out there. The American Association of Legal Nurse Consultants even has a program that you can do. It's online. Then you take an exam, and then it's much like a certification that we have as nurse practitioners. It's something where you continue to do some continuing ed, and you're able to maintain that certification. And oftentimes attorneys will seek out those people who are certified in legal nurse consulting to help them do all of their background information, develop charts, dissect the medical records for them.
So for those who are interested in the legal nurse consulting field, what sort of words of advice do you have for them?
Number one, you need to do it for the right reasons. You need to not do it for the money. It can be an extremely adversarial type of relationship. You need to be very honest. You need to be willing to tell the attorney, even if you're not testifying, even if you're just developing a detailed report for them. Don't just include the information they want to hear, because it's better for them to know if there are disparaging comments about a family member or whatever the case may be. It's best for the attorney to know that that exists in the medical records long before they actually then get further into the lawsuit. I recently had a case when I called the attorney, and I was declining the case anyway because I did not feel like that the nurses had deviated from the standard of care. But I also told him, I said, and you just need to be aware that your client, there are disparaging remarks about her not only in the nursing home records, but in the hospital records and the orthopedic outpatient records, and he got quite upset with me about that. And I said, sir, I just want you to be aware of the facts that are in there so that when you go forward, you won't be blindsided one day in a deposition. So
I'm sure with all the cases that you've seen and all the trials that you've been to, there's some conflict in there for you. And you have to find how far you're willing to go, or whether their opinion is rendered or so forth. Tell us about how you deal with a conflict piece, internal conflict.
Internal
Yes.
conflict. You have to, you have to be honest, and you have to realize everything is based on evidence. Everything is based on guidelines. And you can't go out on a limb and try to stretch the truth. You know, I've had attorneys before say, you know, maybe right before we get to trial, you know, I'm already very solid in my opinions on maybe 2 or 3 issues, but they feel like they just want to get in this one other issue, and they want me to like go out on a limb for them and talk about something else. But at the end of the day, I'm the person who sits in the witness stand and takes an oath before God to tell the truth. So even if it means that you think you might be severing ties with a particular, you know, attorney, it's more important to be honest.
So as we finish up here, we have a few more minutes. Any last words of advice that you have for our listeners?
I think that legal nurse consulting is a very intriguing field. If you have a passion for reviewing records and looking at documentation, because documentation is critical. I learned that in undergraduate school. You know, if you don't document it, you didn't do it. So you have to have an eye for those details, but you also have to have an open mind as well. So that you not only weigh what you read in the medical records, but you also weigh what you read in deposition testimony. So you just have to have an open mind, and you have to have a passion for whatever it is you do.
Do you ever mentor others?
I do occasionally.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I have had several who have approached me and just asked, hey, can I come hang out with you for a day? And if there is a day that I know that I'm reviewing records, it's like, sure, if you want to sit and watch me read records, you know, that's fine. But I also talk to them about the importance of you need to know how to, you know, file your income taxes separately. You have to set up, you know, a separate checking account. You need to make sure that you're charging a fair rate. So, you know, you need to do some research into, if you're doing consulting, you know, what is the going rate in a particular region of the country. If you're doing testimony, testifying, you know, what typically do they charge. And so there's a lot of different facets to it. And there's no real one right way to do it, but whatever method you develop, then you just need to be comfortable with your method.
So you're able to, based on what we were talking about earlier, you're able to choose, I only want to review charts as an expert or as someone who can look through the material to see if a standard of care was breached or so forth. Or you can do trial. Can you do both? I think my understanding is that you do both elements.
Yes, and I do occasionally do both, but honestly, I don't care to sit and read records for hours and create very detailed reports for attorneys that they're going to use, you know, just for themselves. It'll never be discoverable, and I'll never testify. That's very tedious work that takes hours, and there are some people who do it. I know one individual in particular in Alabama who has done it for years, and she is extremely successful in doing that. And she says, I could never sit in the witness stand and actually testify. I will occasionally do those detailed reports, but I prefer looking at the bigger picture and just looking at the 1 or 2 issues that is related to nursing that I need to focus on. And while I do still take notes, I'm not creating those detailed reports for the attorneys.
Well, thank you so much for your interesting stories, and the instruction on your role as legal nurse consulting has been very informative, and I'm sure all of our viewers have appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you next time.
Nurse-led clinics and on-campus clinical partners provide DNP students in our nationally ranked program with experiential learning opportunities.
I decided on the DNP versus a PhD because I knew that I really liked clinical practice.
For me, the DNP was the most natural choice because of my desire to improve outcomes at the bedside.
A UAB School of Nursing education empowers you to transform the world. If you are ready to begin your journey to change someone's life, you belong here.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it and subscribe. Click the bell icon to get instant notification when we release new videos. For more information on how to get CEU credits or to learn more about the UAB School of Nursing, check out the description below. Every nurse has a story. Join us next time on Nursing Pathways as we explore a new one. Thank you for watching.